Siya Kolisi's 100 cap milestone has become more than just a personal triumph. Yes, it's a celebration of how far the game has come and where it is going. And so, to unpack the power of rugby culture with us on and off the field, today we are joined on the line by digital marketing strategist and sports analyst Mogomotsi Setsetse, whose lens captures both the numbers and the narratives that make this game a global movement. Rugby is a sport for the people, but then who does it necessarily belong to? Is there a specific niche now or not? Especially noting that Siya Kolisi as the captain is a cultural icon, right? So what does his journey actually tell us about the changing face of the sport? Who does it belong to? Is it ours now? Can we all claim it?
I think it's ours now. I mean, if you think about rugby, especially in a South African context, you have to go back to '95 when we won the World Cup and
Yes.
what that meant for South Africa after just getting Nelson Mandela as the first black president of South Africa. And now we're talking about Siya Kolisi, from a rugby perspective, who's walked in the same shoes. I mean, if you think about it, he became the first black rugby captain of the Springboks and then went on to win two World Cups. And now he's on his 99th cap, and against France, he'll be getting his 100th if he graces the pitch. So there's a lot of ties when you look at what the sport has meant for South Africa, but it's also been a reflection of South Africa in terms of when you look at the Red Springboks of today and you look at the Springboks of '95, you look at two colored players in the squad and you look at it now, and it's come a long way. Bo Lukhanyo Arm have laid, a foundation for future Springboks. I mean, if you think of Bism Tawarira, who's also had more than 100 caps in the sport, he's
Yeah.
also laid a big, strong foundation for the likes of Oxen Che and so many others that have also graced the rugby pitch. But rugby is the people's sport, especially when you think about many of the schools in South Africa have invested so much in the sport itself. I mean, I played rugby also at high school level. And, we got to tour, we got to see different schools, different places. And at the time, I think it was around the time when Sia was also playing. So there's a lot of, systems that are being put into place by Saru, who are trying to get more inclusivity into the game and get a lot of players from disadvantaged areas as well also playing the game. So we have to look at Sia Kolisi as not only a shining light for what rugby is, but also the success of all those foundations, all those people who donated their time, everybody who invested in the future of the sport, and it's actually paid dividends with a player like Siya Kolisi. I mean, if you look at what he's also done in his personal capacity post-COVID with the Siya Kolisi Foundation, and look, he's a global brand. He's with Rock Nation, and he's carried our flag beyond the stream of rugby. I mean, if he's the catalyst for not just being the face of the Springboks, but being the face of the country as well. He's an ambassador for South Africa outside of the sport as well. So we have to congratulate him with the 100 cap, but let's hope he also goes up to 130 and starts competing on that same level as Evan Etzebeth, who has 138 caps.
Yes, absolutely. He deserves to be honored for that. Now, so if there's one thing we've picked up, and I've noticed it as
Yeah.
well of late, is that rugby has a way of bringing races together.
Mm.
Whenever there's a match day, you'd find South Africans of all races, from your white race and your coloreds, Indians,
Mm.
all putting on the rugby jersey. That's how you know it's a big day and it's a big match, right? So do you believe that rugby as a sport has a way of actually just eradicating the unnecessary rivalry or putting a bandage on sensitive matters that are related to, racial matters that have been
Mm.
spoken about in South Africa? Do you believe that rugby as a sport has the power to put them together and soften the rivalry, or just put the bandage on what people are still hurting from?
I think rugby is a front runner in that perspective. I mean, if you look
Mm.
at the Protea women who were playing in the ICC World Cup final just recently and lost to India, I mean, when you look at what they're trying to achieve, when you look at what the men's cricket is also trying to achieve, they're also trying to bring gold home. But what that means is that we stand behind the flag regardless of the color or culture. I mean,
True.
South Africa is a country where it's not just about color. Sometimes it's also about, your culture, how deep
Mm.
your roots run within South Africa. As we have the Khoi, we have the Xhosas, the Tswanas, the Pedis, the Zulus, we have Bantu, we have Nguni. So the country itself is a melting pot of cultures,
Mm.
and even amongst the whites, it's not just the whites. There's Portuguese, there's French, there's Dutch. There's I mean, with rugby, when we get behind the flag, we get behind the symbol of the Springboks. And the thing is, we're fortunate enough to have one of the best rugby teams in the world, and the Springboks will always have to carry that success, also carrying the demographic of the country in terms of our political and socio-political situation. So, for from that perspective, if the Springboks if Bafana was as successful as the Springboks, they'll also be expected to carry that diversity that the Springboks are. Now, when you look at it from a rugby perspective, I mean, in rugby, you need strength, you need speed, you need different elements that, you know, different cultures can offer. Not all the cultures can offer at the same time. So it's more of like that blend is actually what gives us an advantage on the global stage. So from that perspective, I think it's a big advantage than it is, you know, putting bandages over the wounds is actually what makes us special because we have the speed in the back lines through colored players, through players of color. We have the strength through, the big rugby warrior players as well. So there's a lot of benefits that come from the melting pot that is South African culture.
That's true. So now you mentioned earlier on that you played rugby in high school, and you also mentioned that
Not very well.
not very well, you say. So, but then you mentioned the work that Saru is doing and also the work that the Kolisi Foundation is doing. Now, we mostly know rugby to be a sport that is available in your private or Ivy League schools and not
Yeah.
necessarily found in your rural schools, right? But then with the work that Sari has been doing and the Kolisi Foundation, introducing rugby as a sport from grassroots levels, what does that
Yeah.
say about the future of the sport itself within Africa?
Yeah. South Africa is in a healthy place, I think, from a development perspective. When you talk about grassroots rugby, you're talking about bullies rugby. We're talking about running with no boots, without togs. We're running barefoot, the ball in hand. That's where players fall in love with the game. And then once they get old enough, I mean, that's when you get to your grade 6, grade 7, and all the big colleges come. Great college, they want you because they've produced a couple of green and gold jerseys, and all these big schools want you. But if we go back, I mean, it's not necessarily it was available in the Ivy League schools. It was honestly available in the world schools, the large schools. That was their number one male sport. So, in terms of the way they structured it from when I was playing, is that every player wanted to play in Craven Week, so we were playing towards getting a Craven Week appearance, and now you can watch the Craven Week on TV, like through Super Sports, so on DSTV actually. So when you look at rugby, I mean, the journey is set. As a rugby player at the age of 12, 14, 10, your parents have an idea of how to get you to the green and gold jersey, which is the ultimate goal, to play and represent your country. So, I mean, when you look at other sports, the path is not as clear. I mean, from Bullies rugby to, playing in the Craven Weeks. I mean, these players, Abusia Kolisi, if you go back in the footage, you will see Siya Kolisi playing in the Craven Week. You'll see Eben Etzebeth playing in the Craven Week. Oxenchair playing in the Craven Week. So a lot of these players were known to be green and golds way before we started seeing them on the TV and they started getting senior caps for the Springboks. So the journey for them is always, I would say, expertly put together. Rugby, Saru especially have done a lot when it comes to their sport. I mean, when I was growing up, we used to watch the Tri Nations. We used to watch the Crusaders come play the Sharks in South Africa. Crusaders being a team from, I'm not sure if it's New Zealand or Australia, but back in the day, we used to play against the Southern Hemisphere teams. Now, if you look at modern day, we're playing against the Northern Hemisphere teams, which is the European teams in the Rugby Championship and the Rugby Challenge. So a lot of the work that Saru is doing behind the scenes, people don't actually see, but it's evident in the results. I mean, South African rugby has become the benchmark. When, if you think about the late 2000s, early 2010s, you're looking at New Zealand and Australia being the benchmark, or South Africa right there behind them chasing. When New Zealand won back-to-back World Cups, now South Africa has done the back-to-back World Cups. So rugby has come a long way in South Africa, and I think it all boils down to the fact that, when you're there as a little boy, the dream is it has a ladder. You need to get to this step and then that step and then that step and then you can get there. And I mean, Sia's journey was also a long one where Rasi saw him growing up playing for Western Province, then all the clubs he played at, I mean unions he played at, and now he's playing for the Natal Sharks.
Interesting. Now Mogomotsi, the thing about rugby, you look at it as some sort of a rough sport, right? And it
Yeah,
doesn't. The rough sport part is not only when the game is on. It starts with the what do you call those?
the ruck and
Yes,
the scrum,
yes. Oh, not even the ruck and the scrum. The New Zealand team. The Australian
the
team,
haka.
the haka. It starts with the haka. The haka is so
Yeah,
intimidating, and you already think, hey, yeah, nah, blood is going to be shed. So you're already
yeah,
intimidated from that. Is that intentional? When you kick,
yeah,
is that to intimidate the opponent? Do they do that deliberately, or is it part of the rugby culture? And also, for
yeah.
it to look so rough, does that mean individuals that participate within the sport, when you do decide to participate within the rugby sport, you must just know that you're going to encounter a lot of injuries? Because I'm pretty sure that other sports
Yeah.
doesn't. I'm pretty sure your cricket player doesn't inherit the kind of injuries that a rugby player inherits.
I mean, well, the sports that's, I will say, when it comes to an injury perspective, you're talking about boxing, the amount of concussions, what happens in terms of what happens when players retire, the NFL with American football. With rugby, yes, they don't wear the helmets like American football. They don't wear the big shoulder pads that are extruding. But when it comes to sport itself, yes, there's been a lot of players who didn't make it to the professional ranks because of injuries here and there, and the unions didn't carry them through all the way to professional level. But if you go to the club level of rugby, it's very healthy. I mean, a lot of players who were stars in high school got injured in matric and never made it to the professional ranks. Play for clubs like I know one personally called Diggers. There's Falker in Kempton Park, and there's many different clubs. So for a lot of players that do get injured, they do recover and they do actually go on to play club rugby. And it's quite a big thing. And families come out on a Saturday to go watch the games. It's quite an atmosphere. You get to see. Well, that's what I'm saying. South African rugby has so much depth in terms of what it is. And I think because we look at the green and gold on a Saturday, and we have that thing at the office, we all wear Springbok jerseys. We don't actually see how deep it goes. But in rugby, the unions take very good care of their clubs.
Mm-hmm.
And for those players who do get injured, it's not the end of the road. Some of them actually go on to have successful careers elsewhere. Like every other sport, there is risks.
Mm.
And to answer your question about the haka, I mean, the haka is a cultural expression. It's for the Samoans and the islands around New Zealand, the Maori people, to be more specific.
Mm.
For them, it's a cultural war cry. So if you go on to Google and if you want to research the history, um, go and Google the haka and see they do it in school. They teach it in school. There was now some viral videos that are going around of ladies doing it in parliament. There was a new MP that was being sworn into parliament, and they had a haka to
Yes, I
welcome her
remember
into
seeing that.
parliament.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so it's more of a cultural thing. It's not just something that happens in rugby. I think a lot of us see it there and we're like, oh, it's just a rugby thing. It's an
Oh,
intimidation. But
oh.
it's a war cry. It's cultural. It's for the Maori people. Right now they're having, I don't want to go into the political side of it, but
Mm.
it's now made it into parliament in New Zealand because there's big pushback from the Maori people and what we would say is the colonizers. So when you look at what rugby does, it gives countries an opportunity to express themselves because it's not just New Zealand that do the haka. They're the most famous country to do it in terms of rugby,
Yeah,
but the Samoans do it, Togo does it, a few other countries do it,
yeah.
and it's nothing yes, it's supposed to intimidate because it's a war cry,
Of
but
course.
every high school in South Africa, most high schools in South Africa have a war cry.
Wow. And that's the power of sports, eh? Sports can help actually handle political matters within a country much easier because then those athletes have the power to take a stand and
Yeah,
they do that through the sports. With that said, though, with the violence or not violence, but the injury risks that you get within the
yeah,
rugby sports, now we have female rugby teams. Okay,
yes.
so how are those women's rugby teams across Africa reshaping the culture and meaning of the game, both on the field and off the field?
Well, you have to first look at the two formats. I mean, rugby, as you know it on the TV, is a 15-man sport,
Mm-hmm.
but there's sevens, which is basically seven players on the pitch playing rugby. So a lot of the rugby that we see in terms of, the blitz box, then the sprint box, which is the sevens and the 15 side, we have for the female ladies side as well. And ladies rugby, it's a different game because it's quite faster. The ladies run a lot quicker. There's a lot of sidestepping for those who like rugby on the front foot. So it offers us something totally different from what you see with the multiple phases you'd see in male rugby. I mean, in men's rugby, but for the ladies, a lot of the rugby is quick, fast. And look, it's the sport remains the same regardless of who plays it, what gender. Um, but look, it's worth enjoying as well. But it's nice to have that inclusivity because it tells you that we've moved away from saying that's for the men and that's for the ladies. We are now saying, look, if you love the sport, if you're gonna play the sport, if you're passionate about it, let's let you through the door. Let's let you build a career around it, and let's let you, explore your passions.
That's true. And if you've just tuned in, this is African Diaries. We are currently speaking to digital marketing strategist and sports analyst Mogomotsi Setsetse, and he is just giving us the feel of how rugby is sort of influencing people's lifestyles, everyday lifestyles at the moment, because as you've heard and seen, rugby is a sport to be enjoyed by all races and all cultures. Listen, Somutsi, I wanted to then find out from you, in terms of the next chapter in the rugby sport, right? Now, if
Mm.
rugby is Africa's next cultural export after music and fashion, now what should the continent do now to protect its authenticity while scaling its global influence?
I think the first thing is to say, let's not be shy to go share what we have with the world.
Mm.
Rugby is a shining example of what is possible when we become so good at something that we have a surplus of talent. In rugby, we have, every like you see when we play France, you'll see surnames that are familiar to South Africa. You're like, hey, Van der Merwe. When we play Wales, the same thing. When we play the Irish, when we play the Japanese, you'll find players who were born in Kempton Park and are playing for Japan, or players who are born in Boxburg or somewhere in South Africa, but they're playing for these countries around the world, including America. So we have become so good at the sport that we are now, the main exporter for the talent. And what that does is that it moves talent along and it creates a healthy environment for new talent to come in.
Mm.
And it doesn't lock players down to saying, listen, if you can't make it into the Springbok team, maybe you get citizenship in America and you play for America. So the main thing is, we are a very talented continent.
Mm.
And once we become a continent that hogs its talent and we don't let our talent thrive, we won't be able to allow new talent to grow because that old talent will be stuck there and will be holding everyone back in line. So Sia to have reached 100 caps, somebody had to play the position before him and somebody else had to play flanker before him and somebody else is lighting up to play behind him as well. And that's what Rassi Erasmus is doing at the moment with this hybrid blended team of young talents coming in and the experience as well,
Yeah.
passing down knowledge. And to answer your question, I mean, it is one of the biggest exports we have as South Africa and also as Africa. I mean, for example, in soccer, you'd look at Brazil and South America as the biggest exporters of talent to the world for soccer. So for rugby, we can own the space. And one thing I will tell you is that for rugby, like I said, you need a blend of skills that, not necessarily every other sport is going to look for. I mean, if you're fast, if you can handle a ball, I mean, if you're fast, we can teach you how to handle the ball. It's as simple as that.
Okay.
We can teach you how to pass, we can teach you how to catch. But if you have the pace, we can show you how to run, where to run. And that's the thing about rugby. If you want to learn, you're going to become coachable and you probably have a successful career. If you have strength, if you're a big boy, like if you have you'll be in the racks, you'll be a prop, you'll be a hooker, depending on, your build and your aptitude. So all I'm saying is as Africans, we need to continue to try to share our talent with the world. And not only that, let's educate the world about who we are when we are, at our best. Not
Yeah.
necessarily saying to the world, come to us to come see what we have to offer. Let's go to the world and show them what we have to offer.
Okay, so Mogomotsi, then I want to then end our conversation with this particular question.
Yeah,
As much as rugby seems to be a very brutal sport, but if there's one thing we can pick up is the camaraderie within team players
yeah.
and also just opponents, where you find them hugging out after a brutal match and yet they're still hugging
Yeah.
it out. What do you think, the globe can learn from this kind of spirit within the sport?
That sometimes it's just sports. It's not personal. It's not war. I'm not here to kill you. We're here to just, earn a wage. We're here to win a match for our country, our badge.
Yeah,
So at the end of the day, we cannot take that feud off the pitch. And I think one thing about rugby is that it gives players the ability to release, the stress, to release the anger, and they leave it all on the pitch. And that's the beautiful thing about it. So sometimes imagine if you right now had to play a full 80 minutes of rugby and you were angry, like, you get a few tackles out there, you release that anger, you come back a happier person. So I'd say that's the one thing the world needs to learn, is that we need to find an outlet to release all that pent up stress and anger.
of course, of course. Well, thank you so much for making time to speak to us. And I think at this point, if you do not own a rugby jersey, which country are you living in? Because it just seems to be the pulse of the country. And I believe it's the same in other
For the
countries
continent.
across Africa. Yeah, throughout the continent. Thank you so much, Mogomotsi, for joining us. We do hope to be touching base with you soon.
Thank you so much for having me. Maybe next time we'll be talking boxing. Who knows?
Exactly. Thank you. Well, there you have it. That was the voice of sports analyst and also a digital marketing strategist, Mogomotsi Setsetse. And yeah, how interesting is it? Listen, if anything I know about rugby is that it's a very easy sport to learn. It's not that tricky. It's not, I mean, I learned it in a day and I was already hooked on it. And I just love the fact that whenever there's a huge match, people come together in one space, reminding you of that time back in 2010 during the FIFA World Cup when we had those spaces where, people would just come together as a community to watch a match. And it was just a great atmosphere to be part of. And I'm glad that the rugby sport is still keeping up with that, bringing people together to celebrate, and just get to forget about the racial and cultural differences. And that is the power of sports. Listen, this is African Diaries. My name is Nolo Matlaila, and we do have it is 42 minutes to past 11. I'm not quite there to do the calculations in my head, but we do have a few minutes left, right? Of we do have a few minutes left of African Diaries, and so I think what we can do is get back to some music, get a breather. On the other side of this, we're gonna try and get in touch with Morris Touch to let us know what's happening on Afro Republic, but also just to wrap up the show and just give you a recap of what we spoke about today.